This is 1987, the fan trip coming to Brodhead. Pat Wheaton said he was working on that with the North Freedom Museum crew. And that's the first time a steam engine had come to Brodhead since 1954 in September, when we ran these fan trips. As my grandpa would have said, it did my heart good to hear a steam whistle in Brodhead again. Classmate Rexanne Ronneberg, who used to work in this bank, Rexanne Olin, said it brought tears to her eyes just to hear that steam engine in town one more time. 1987. I went around town taking pictures. This is 1970. In the lower right is my 65 Mustang convertible. Patricia said to me, did you like having a Mustang? And I said, I loved it. And she says, I think you should get one every 45 years. So we have a 2010 out front. And, you know, 45 years from now, I'll be 108 and we'll get another one. But that's where the railroad ended. There's a track in the street coming past the cold storage. And of course, even those of us who love history, don't do what we know we should do. One day in about 1963, I saw a wooden refrigerator car parked at that cheese warehouse, iced refrigerator, old car, and I said, you know, next time I see one of those in town, I'll take a picture of it. Right. There's the Goldenrod Creamery. The track never went quite that far, but it ended about beside where I am. And what a memory, going hunting out in Decatur, walking all the way from Brodhead out to Decatur on a cold winter day. You could hear the milk cans from that clanging around 5 miles out of town. I would go out there. Repeat. Here's another shot of the steam train coming into town for the fan trips. I rode some. Cousin Glenn riding the train. And the observation car from North Freedom that Pat Wheaton was riding in at the moment I took this picture. You're in there, Pat. Look closely, folks, see if you can find him. The train down there by the depot, when the cars come in. The coal shed on the right was right where our grandfather's loading pens for the stockyard had been, right there. And of course the bank is back here and these buildings are gone and the bank is bigger. Just a grab shot, kind of blurry, but it's heading to Monroe. But that Northwestern engine, virtually identical for all practical purposes to the engines that the Milwaukee Road ran out here until the 50s. Those engines were 40, 50 years old by the time they were done out here. Coming up the hill, the same place I had the movie of the diesel stalling. Only this is about 15 years later. The most entertaining part of the show is going to be me trying to advance the slides. Here's coming into Monroe. The overpass is gone, the cheese buildings are gone. There had been a railroad track next to the sidewalk. When I went in there, there was a lot going on railroad-wise, riding the train in '54. This is the depot in Monroe. Now the cheese center moved several blocks away. The feed mill behind it is gone. During the heyday of passenger service, this guardrail and these roads weren't there. It was all tracks through there. Another shot in Monroe of the fan trip. I called the buildings on the left Cheese Row in my own mind as a kid. There used to be a siding in front of that with refrigerator cars parked at it. Marty had its own cheese refrigerator cars that said Marty Monroe on them. This is the first photograph I ever took. I was 11. This is the last day that passenger service ran to Brodhead. There's the train behind Bjork's, behind the doghouse, switching in town. Here's another picture of that combination car, and Mr. Barry, the conductor. Did you know Barry, Jack?
His boy hired me. Joe, yeah, I know the old man too. Yeah.
Well, Mr. Barry was always very kind to me when I would ride the train, and here's down by the depot, the last time the cars came in, June of '58. Here's one of the cars from the Brodhead line. I found it in the Toma shops 20 years later. Brodhead Monroe in about 1975. The freight house on the left has been repainted white for use by a feed mill. Look at all the trucks now hauling cheese. Didn't do my heart good in the wheat-grown track. Here's Brodhead in the summer of '68. And the next shot is behind the depot, autumn of '68. I grabbed that picture because I thought this could be the last time there's ever this much activity at the Brodhead depot. There's a Pierce furniture truck loading furniture out of the baggage room. Looks good for the railroad. Actually, Pierce was renting that as warehouse space. Behind the Pierce Pierce furniture truck is a boxcar of lumber being unloaded one stick at a time, probably by Jake Jones, onto a flatbed truck to be taken across the street to the green buildings to Roderick Lumber, where it'll be unloaded one stick at a time into the lumberyard buildings. Today, lumber comes shrink-wrapped and is unloaded off a flat car by a forklift. But still in 1968, it was coming in a boxcar, one stick at a time. There's a flatbed and a crane on this side next to the park. That's Knight Manufacturing loading farm machineries to be shipped out by rail. 1968. It's easy to forget how fast things change, isn't it? The oldest rail in town, by the way, I checked the dates on all the rails, was right next to the park. 1880 was the oldest I found in the 50s. Hello, guys. Wooden bunk cars behind the track. This is 1968. Look at the deplorable condition of the track. A succession of short line operators went broke out here, but Wisconsin Southern is making it. They run all over southern Wisconsin, almost as far up as Appleton and to Chicago. The track today is, in my opinion, Jack, correct me if you think I'm wrong, the track today is the best condition it's ever been in.
I'll say, yeah.
The end of the, I love cabooses, another thing we've lost. The hand car house, and behind it a wooden box car. And behind that, along the cheese factory, are conveyors that used to take milk cans out of the cheese factory. The world was changing fast in 1968. The Reed House, Helen Beckwith's house. Al Ringling roomed there when he worked in Brodhead and started doing trapeze acts in the attic. Helen Beckwith told me his trapeze was up there. I went up there, I saw it. I thought, but I won't speak for it because certainly somebody from the Circus World Museum in Baraboo is going to come get that. Duh. I was the only one person alive at the time who knew it was there, probably, after she died. Well, I guess we've seen that before, and we've seen that before, and here's Race Street, Truman Nolan's house, or West 3rd Avenue. I always called it Race Street. My family always used the old names. West 2nd Avenue was Clinton Avenue, you know. That's the line to New Glarus. The power plant. Neat place. As a small boy, go watch the water come out of the power plant on a cold winter day. A big excitement in Brodhead. The pickle factory. The track ran up between the vats. The vats were open. Nasty little boys used to defile those vats. But I've read that they had to be opened because that's what made the pickles green. If they had not cured in sunlight, the pickles would have been white. I've read that. Technically, this wasn't a factory. It was, in the parlance of the industry, it was a salting station. There had been a turntable instead of the vats and platforms, and a door in the end of that building, and that's where the New Glarus line train spent the night. Another view of the pickle factory, as everybody called it. The train heading toward Monroe, 1973. The depot is starting to look dowdy. The track isn't any too great. Just pictures around town. That looks better today without the windows boarded up. The paint redone for the bicentennial in '76. Okay, that's Dodgeville, the Illinois Central train we saw the movies of. A couple pictures of that, typical of what would have come to Brodhead. Here's the train coming down Race Street from New Glarus. Yeah, it's by your house. Yeah, this was Ingebrigtsen's, that was Regal's. Across the street is Wishes.
In the park.
The park is to the left. My great-grandma Hannah Smith, the same one with the Edison light bulb, she said that when she was a new mom in the mid-1870s, Her best friend lived in the house that's what became Wishes, and she would push the buggy, no sidewalks and no paving. Said the sand was so deep in Race Street it was hard to push a buggy, and by the time she got up there, the hem of her dress would be full of kinney burrs as the world changed. Russ Porter was the art director of Model Railroader magazine in 1951 when he took these pictures. Never published by a guy who published a lot. This is the Brodhead train at Gratiot at the coal tower. And looking back from the engine past the combine to the coal tower. Elmer Duxted, Maggie was his nickname, at about age 72, engineer on the train through Brodhead, at the controls of the steam engine, of course. Looking toward Brodhead from the left side of the cab of the steam engine, that's Highway 11 right in front of the engine, going up the hill over the track. Gratiot, 1942, still an RPO, Railway Post Office car behind the engine and a coach behind that. And it's waiting for a meet with the train from Mineral Point. On Sundays, they ran clear through from Milwaukee to Mineral Point without freight cars. The rest of the week, they originated in Janesville. This is 1965, I think. The engine 508 crossing the street not Darlington. No, is it Darlington?
It looks like it.
Yeah, it's Darlington. I'm sorry, I had a brain fade. This is the year I was in kindergarten, 1952, Janesville. This train has come all the way from Sioux Falls, South Dakota, running across Iowa all night. And in the wee hours of the morning, it crossed the Mississippi at Prairie du Chien, has come along the Wisconsin to Madison, now headed for Chicago. And the train you see best is the Brodhead train being made up. And it will head to West Yard, grab its freight cars, and head for Mineral Point and Brodhead. And this is 1954, the last month that the steam ran. That car is the same as I have a model of on the table. September 1954. Running from the depot in Janesville to pick up its freight cars at the yard behind the photographer and head to Brodhead. The roundhouse is now run by Wisconsin Southern. It is beautiful. Next time you take Highway 11 to Janesville, take a look at the railroad yard there. That roundhouse looks the best it ever has. A succession of short line operators failed out here. The first was Chicago, Madison, and Northern. They had a cute color scheme, cute caboose, cute business car. That's probably one reason they didn't make it. Everything was too cute, but not enough business. The Central Wisconsin Railroad didn't make it either. That was the Blue Ox. If Cousin Glenn was here, they're switching the Woodbridge plant. 1965, back to my 65 Mustang, and I guess it's 68, but it's a 65 Mustang. Mineral Point, in its dying days, very decrepit at that point. This is later when it's boarded up. This is about 1984. Just before the tracks were pulled, whatever year that was, I think it's about 84. The Walker House in the mid-70s, looking terrible. Nobody makes it there either. People keep taking it over. It's got a different owner, a different sign, and nobody makes it there. This is literally Mineral Point. That's where lead was discovered, with the depot behind it. Here's a buddy of mine on the track at Mineral Point, early 80s. The red tailings pile from the zinc mill, long gone. Improved with grass. I like the history myself. The railroad from Mineral Point, by the way, was a separate company. It was built from Mineral Point down to Warren, Illinois to connect with the Galena line from Chicago. The same year the train came through Brodhead. We didn't connect with them until 1882. Built from Monroe over to Gratiot to connect with them. And I mentioned the Sugar River Valley building its roadbed to Albany. In 1880, the Milwaukee Road acquired that and built its New Glarus branch on it. So part of the Mineral Point Railroad got used from Brodhead to Albany. The part from Brodhead to Avon is still sitting there. Mineral Point. The roundhouse used to be in the weeds on the left. That cement wall is the foundation of what was the world's largest zinc mill. Mineral Point had a tremendous amount of business going on. This is about 1975. If you've not been to the Mineral Point Museum, for heaven's sakes, go. There I am at age 37. It is a gorgeous restoration. I have 4 dioramas on display upstairs that I built for them, 3 depots and 1 mining scene. It is as fine a museum as you'll find anywhere. The depot at Dunbarton on the Shullsburg branch. Downtown Shullsburg, Water Street Pub and Eatery on the left. An ore bin in the yards. History, history, history. Shullsburg was a mining town. Here's where the lead and zinc ore got dumped into the train. All long gone. Here's Darlington. I've always loved convertibles. There's my 1982 Datsun. And the depot at Livingston on the Chicago and Northwestern over by Platteville. Everything dying in the 60s. Remember the movies, Uncle John's movies at Dodgeville with the depot? There it is in 1984. The coaling tower at Montfort Junction, concrete, so it still stands, surrounded by windmills today. Uncle John on the platform at Gratiot. He's 74 years old there. You don't find any mines out by Shullsburg anymore, but in 67, there was still this one standing. Our heritage. The turntable at Benton on the end of the line from Madison. Remember the scene of the train coming through the cut under the bridge? That's the way it looks today. Linden, northwest of Mineral Point. There was a Mineral Point and Northern Railroad. The depot platform shows on the left. Here's the right-of-way headed for Highland, 30-mile railroad. Here's the feed mill at Highland. That railroad lasted, there's the depot at Highland to build onto. That railroad was built in 1905, died in 1930, lasted only 25 years, but it hauled a ton of mine goods. Refrigerator car at Hillbrook Brewery, the track long gone, but in the early 80s they were still shipping beer by rail. And the last slide, it's the yard office at West Yard in Janesville, made out of an 1880s coach. And that's where the trains come into Brodhead when they got their paperwork for the freight cars. And that's the kind of car whose interior appointments were outfitted into the cars used out here at the end in the 50s. And Pat, let's get the lights for just a minute. And we'll conclude with just a a brief statement of what the railroad meant to me, and then end with one last video. To me, the railroad was a focal point. It was emblematic of society. It was an icon of everything else in my world. But it was the most interesting part of it. I was born into a world with no television, no air conditioning, and a 37 Chevy that never came out of the barn in the winter. If you wanted to go someplace, you rode the train or walked. And I am fortunate to have had the railroad as a focal point, the most interesting, fascinating, beautiful, central feature of society for me. Well, focal points have peripheries, and the periphery is defined by the focal point. And so to me, the railroad was, yeah, it was trains, and it was steam and smoke. And I tell Pat, maybe we should get a potpourri dish, put some valve oil in it and coal dust, and light a candle underneath, and maybe we can make our house smell like a steam engine. She hasn't tried it yet. And so the trains, and especially the steam engines, were the focal point. But in the nearby periphery was a red brick school right along the tracks where we could play by the trains. One day I was bouncing a volleyball off the side of the train, didn't notice that a door was open, the volleyball went into a boxcar. I chased it out by Chubb Creek past the cemetery. They stopped, they gave me the volleyball. I was a half hour late coming back from recess. Mrs. Collins asked, what were we doing? Well, the volleyball went on the train. I chased the train, stopped the train, got the volleyball, and had to walk back to town. And she's gone. Right. Anyway, the trains were the focal point. The railroad was the focal point for me. But in close periphery was crowds of people on Saturday night right over here. so numerous that you had to walk a zigzag path just to get down the street. You remember that?
Friday nights.
Well, Friday nights, you're young. That's
The bank was open till what, 8?
yeah, Friday nights the businesses were open. When I was young, it was Saturday night. Saturday night downtown. And the trains were the focal point, but the crowds on Saturday night and the aroma of Just Chef's popcorn wafting from the popcorn wagon on the corner with the little twinkling yellow lights, and the chimes from the Lutheran church mixing with that, playing hymns back before anybody thought that violated their civil rights. And the trains were the focal point for me, but I also remember down in Champaign when I visit Dad, the horse-drawn milk wagon coming and delivering a bottle of chocolate milk, glass bottle at that, just for me. The trains were my focal point, but it was also a world of friendly country crossroads stores with glass top gas pumps out front. And somebody once in a while still cranking a Model T Ford right over there. Saw it any number of times. It was a world of country churches with hymns wafting from the open windows out over green pastures in the stillness of a Sabbath morn. It was a world of little boys who shot cap guns at imaginary bad men, and little girls who served imaginary tea to little friends who wanted to grow up to be ladies. And when the steam engines went away, and the orange and maroon passenger cars went away, and at last the branch line trains themselves went away and came no more again through the grassy meadow down by the creek, some sensitive hearts mourned their loss, for it was the most vibrant, colorful thread of civilization pulled out of the tapestry and cast away. One more definition of home, no longer quite what it had been before. And so people ask me, Greg, why do you love trains? And my response is, well, if you have an hour and a box of Kleenex, I'll tell you all about it. Pat, let's do that last video. This video was made in 1978, and it shows the final days of the Milwaukee Road through here, before the short line operators began their work out here. But the line to Mineral Point went in the mid-'80s, never to be restored. And it's not just that trucks took it on. You realize our world has changed. The industry that used to be in Mineral Point just isn't there anymore. The industry that used to be in Brodhead just isn't here anymore. And so this picture was taken in the pre-dawn light. It gets better. One of the SD9s switching in Mineral Point. It's picking up its caboose. Jack, were you on this?
No.
Not this one. There was no business this day in Mineral Point. They are picking up their caboose and heading for Janesville. It's getting a little lighter now. Maintenance had been deferred. And so when you think about 30 trains a day on the Mineral Point line, all 10 passenger trains a day through Brodhead, if you count the New Glarus branch, which of course you would. Then you see the grass-grown track here. You realize that, well, we weren't really noticing the changes. Huge changes had come. Look at the gravel roads in 1978. How fast we forget. I didn't remember how many gravel roads were still around in 78. Isn't that amazing? And this is September. A beautiful time of year. And here's the train at Calamine, and they've picked up several empty fertilizer cars. Here's a shot from the left side of the engine, the fireman's side of the engine, coming down to a switch. Rail fans taking pictures up ahead there on the left of the track. You can't see a tie here, and they didn't replace ties by then unless they needed to because of a derailment. Nothing had been maintained very much. A few ties right at the switch, so you can find the switch. The speed limit from Monroe to Mineral Point at this point is 10 miles an hour. Look at the thing rock. And weedy. No new ties for a long time. And you know that with the little business left out there and 10 mile an hour speed limit on that track and no new ties installed. The company has no intention of any future here. They're going to milk it for a few years, and when it just isn't operable anymore, they're going to let it sink. That was some of the lightest rail in the United States. 65-pound rail out there. Here's a deer trail down the middle of the track. Original rails from 1882 for the most part. Ain't that something? A few ties by a bridge because you didn't want to dump it into the, you could kill somebody if you dumped it in the hole there, but other than that, at 10 miles an hour, if you went off the track, you weren't likely to do much damage. You probably wouldn't tip anything over. You'd spend half a day pulling it back on and you'd go on with life. A young engineer in 1978. Here's the steel bridge coming into Darlington, and that's still there, recreation trail. You can see that bridge from the highway. And here's a boxcar at an industry yet, and the white building on the right used to be half the depot. Was cut off and sold. The dairy plant to the left doesn't have a siding anymore. Kind of the story of railroading in the small towns. But they have a few more cars to pick up in Darlington. 1978, a lot of caveman beards and haircuts. And that's the 518, which came out here a lot. 508 came out here a lot. At the end of the passenger era in 1958, 512 came out here a lot. You'll see in a minute a wigwag signal when this train crosses the main street of Darlington. There's a signal that swings that had a red light in it. Those were called wigwags. They're extinct today, or nearly so. Brodhead had a couple. West 2nd Avenue had a man in a shed, a crossing shanty, that would come out with a stop sign till I was in 2nd grade, folks. It's hard to believe how much has changed. And he would flip his switch in his shanty, and at Main Street here and West 3rd Avenue, over by Ross Olden's, the wigwags would go off, but they were manually controlled. And now we're going to play a little music that just captures for you the mood I had and that I saw in this dying industry. 30 trains a day, passenger trains, and now it was disappearing before our eyes. Gregg. I believe that was once the leading industry in the country. And that's about the size of it. And, yeah, thank you. The closing line is, as we get the lights here, I'll keep talking so nobody tries to get up and leave in the dark. Thank you so much. It's been the audience of a lifetime for me. If there hereafter be, let's all meet again down by the depot when the cars come in.